Hello everyone, Loremaster of Sotek here, back with the next episode of the Greenskin Q&A, and I can see the light at the end of the tunnel. We've got three major subjects to cover after this video, and we'll be at the end, which is pretty much, I think it's how Greenskins feel about other races, Greenskins as mercenaries, and oh, I don't remember the last one off the top of my head, but there's three big ones that will be the rest of this series, and then we'll finally be done with the Greenskins. So, and one thing I'd like to ask, for those of you watching this, if you could start thinking and commenting about what race you want to feature as the next Q&A series, I'd really appreciate it if we could go ahead and get the votes coming in on that, so we can start to focus our attention there. Anyway, let's get into it. Our first question today comes from Cant59, who asks, have any Greenskins made it near the Chaos Gates at either of the poles? What would happen if a Greenskin were to lead a Grey WAAAGH through one? Could Greenskins start infecting and spreading through the realm of Chaos? Would that in theory lead to Chaos Orcs or Goblins? So, successfully reaching the realm of Chaos alone would be virtually impossible for Greenskins. There's no underground route that you can take to get all the way through the Chaos Waste to the Realm of Chaos and then go through the Realm of Chaos until you reach the actual Polar Gates. You can't go underground to do that. So you have to go over land, and the problem is that the very air itself and the land and all the creatures and everything is just saturated with deadly amounts of warpstone dust, essentially, and endless hordes of monsters and terrible abominations. You know, you have like chaos warriors who are fighting eternal battles, you have demons wandering the land in mass. It's a huge mess, and to get through the realm of chaos honestly requires a fair amount of planning, a fair amount of stealth, and a fair amount of luck. You can't force your way through the realm of chaos unless you had already somehow taken over the world or found out a way to neutralize the power of chaos, which by the time you figure out how to do that, the realm of chaos isn't really a factor at that point, and getting to the polar gates wouldn't matter. So for Greenskins, getting Greenskins to the realm of chaos and getting them through the polar gates successfully, to me, feels like about the odds of giving a group of children a bunch of dynamite and telling them to run through a volcano where there's only like a single super narrow, very winding path that leads to the exit and a bunch of false paths that just don't go anywhere. And the room constantly shakes every 3 minutes. And it's like a 2-hour journey. You know, it's like, it's just probably not going to happen. If a Greenskin somehow did make it, they wouldn't be able to infect the realm of chaos. It's not a, it doesn't work that way. It has a stable environment to it. It's very confusing and it's hard to like wrap mortal minds around, but it is a functioning environment, just in ways that are almost impossible for anyone to comprehend. Next up, we have the Mysterious Man. He asks, oh well, I'm gonna do it again. Do you have a list of Greenskins that legitimately scare you? If you do, why do they scare you? Grimgor's probably on the list though, right? So, to be honest with this, when it comes to legitimately scary, I mean, sure, orc characters can be very scary just because they're big hulking behemoths. Like Grimgor Ironhide would be one of the most terrifying things to see coming at you. But as a human, I honestly don't think orcs would be that scary for me personally. Orcs are only scary if you're something that tries to put up a fight, and I do not think I would try and fight orcs. I would run away from orcs. And orcs don't really have a great interest in things that don't fight back very well. I would probably be ignored by most orcs. Now, what I would be scared of are goblins. I would be terrified of goblins, especially really, really cruel goblins like Skarsnik. He's probably the scariest character for the Greenskins, and the one that, if I had to pick among any Greenskins, I would say is the most frightening. Because the thing about Night Goblins, more than anything else that the Greenskin culture, is that Night Goblins are cruel. And they are sadistic little monsters that get a lot of pleasure and enjoyment out of torturing other living creatures, especially humans or human, things with intelligence. They get a hoot out of it. So I would say that I would be very, very scared of goblins if they existed, because the only thing you have against them is that humans are a little bit smarter than them on average, and we can physically overpower them. But there are a lot more of them than there are us, and they also have much better senses than we do in certain environments like the dark. So, and the things they ride are also nightmare fuel. I would not want to deal with giant spiders or squigs. With orcs, they're big, stupid, and loud. I feel confident that there are ways to deal with orcs, or at least get away from them. Goblins are a totally different story. Alright, next up is Nicholas McLeod. Hey Loremaster, always love your videos. Thanks, man. I have a few questions for you today. My first question is, you send your future video for the Greenskins, the Night Goblin shamans can take anraknorak spiders as a mount option. How would the Night Goblins get this mount? They live in caves. Furthermore, do Night Goblins and Orc Goblins ever work together? Finally, in Total War Warhammer, Greenskins and beastmen can make diplomatic agreements. Is this common in the lore? So, not Night Goblins. That, I don't know if that was a mistake in what I said out loud. In Total War Warhammer, the only thing, and in fantasy, the only thing that can have an anraknorak as a mount is the Great Goblin Shaman, which in Warhammer, unfortunately, we never got a supplement that, because goblins you can break into 3 groups, which are Night Goblins, what I call normal goblins or plains goblins, and then you have forest goblins. And in Warhammer, they never created like a separate lord and hero for just the forest goblins. Basically, the only way you can tell them apart when designing them for like tabletop is by their mounts, because regular goblins take wolves, forest goblins take spiders, and night goblins have squigs. But so in Total War Warhammer, what I want to see in a future DLC or free DLC update for the Greenskins would be giving the Great Goblin Shaman the anraknorak spider mount, not the Night Goblin Shaman, because the Night Goblin's the hero version, Goblin Wizard. The Great Goblin Shaman is the Lord one that nobody ever takes. But I think if it had an anraknorak, people might, because that would be super cool. And you could run like a Forest Goblin themed army. As for, and the reason they do that is because the Great Goblin Shamans are the traditional leaders of Forest Goblin tribes. As for, do they ever work together? Yeah, all the time. Most Greenskins will work together under certain circumstances, but Night Goblins in the Gray Mountains, the Black Mountains, and the Middle Mountains have worked together with the Forest Goblins frequently. The Night Goblins that live in like the World's Edge Mountains, especially down in the Badlands where like Skarsnik is, they tend not to work with Forest Goblins just because most Forest Goblins don't live there. So Skarsnik, for instance, didn't really have a big relationship with any Forest Goblins until the end times when a bunch of them came down to join his WAAAGH. But when they encounter each other, they frequently will work together. But they just don't run into each other very much. And then, do they have diplomatic... Greenskins and beastmen, very rare. I would not say they ever have diplomatic agreements. They might end up working together if there was a situation that kind of forced them to. For instance, if a Imperial army from Reichland or Minland got really uppity and started trying to clear out the Drakewald or the Reichwald, I could definitely see the Forest Goblin tribes and the beastmen working together, not intentionally, but basically attacking the same enemy and not attacking each other in preference for defending their home or their environment. So in that sense, yeah, they could kind of come to a pseudo non-aggression, but 99% of the time, if the two encounter each other, they're just going to immediately butt heads and go at it. Because the thing about, well, we'll get into it more when we do our big day on Greenskins' views of other races, but Greenskins are very fighty, and they are not prone to diplomacy, and beastmen especially are not prone to diplomacy, so not really. No Peace, Just War asks, if giants are the spawn of inbreeding between neutral acting sky titans, then why do they all side with factions of chaos and destruction like the Greenskins? So the Because, honestly, they're just big, destructive drunks. And any civilized race just will not put up with their garbage. And, because the thing is, giants are naturally bullies. They take what they want, and they spend a lot of their time angry due to the fact that they're in constant pain from being, like, super inbred and a bunch of other issues that they have. You know, they're really big, hulking brutes. You know, there's nothing that fits them super well, so they spend a lot of their time almost entirely naked, and they just wander around the world. Pretty much everybody hates them because they're big, stupid brutes, and they've been inbred over so many generations that their quality of life is really poor. And because of that, they're angry, upset, and they tend to just, and even if they're just casually walking around, they destroy things. And they just aren't in the mood to behave or to have, like, negotiations with people when they could just take it by force. And Greenskins are totally cool with that system. They are more than happy to put up with that in order to just have a big stompy guy on their team. You know, he's allowed to do whatever he wants, and they are happy to have him along. And he figures out, hey, this system works pretty well for me. So that's usually why they end up on the same side. The civilized and order-like races of the world just don't put up with giants because they, like, imagine having a belligerent drunk in your town, but he's hundreds of feet tall. Imagine that guy urinating everywhere, defecating everywhere, vomiting everywhere. Because of how gangly his limbs are, he constantly trips and falls over, and every time he does, he's going to be crushing houses, killing people. He'll eat people because he just doesn't consider them anything more significant than ants. You know, they'll drink copious amounts of booze and are unreliable allies at best. So that's why even people that could afford to hire giants very rarely do, unless there is a desperate need for one for some specific reason. Next up is Cossack in the Sack. Interesting name. He asks, I know that Greenskins managed to convince giants to work for them by giving them booze, food, and something to smash. How do orcs go about getting trolls to fight for them? And then, are there Greenskins in the New World and Norska? And if so, do they manage to thrive, or are the harsh living conditions and rival races too much for them? P.S. You're my favorite Warhammer 4 Fantasy Loremaster. Keep it up. Thanks. So, trolls mostly join up with Greenskins on their own desire. Like, they just, when they find Greenskins, they have they willingly will go and join up with the Greenskin horde, especially a big one. Like, if a WAAAGH gets going, it will attract the attention of certain monsters, especially trolls and giants, and they will usually willingly join up with the horde because they just see it as super easy access to food that they can just follow around and just, you know, get into fights and get to eat as much as they want. But a fair number of trolls are sought out and captured by goblin trappers, especially for a certain tribe, or if they're facing a certain kind of enemy where they want trolls specially. Like, if they're going up against dwarves, and they know the dwarves have a lot of really high-quality armor, or specialized and really powerful range fire, but maybe they don't have a lot of access to flaming attacks or flaming weapons, some Greenskins are clever enough to know that if they could get a pack of trolls on their side, then they could send the trolls in first, who will do a ton of damage and can just regenerate all the damage they do sustain. So, sometimes they do that on purpose. But that's generally how they get found and lured in. Is either goblin trappers will go find them and capture them and bring them to the horde, but most of the time, when Greenskins and trolls end up being in the same place, trolls will just kind of naturally join on. Just because in their very dim-witted minds, it just works for them. As for the second question about where they live, Greenskins live literally everywhere except the island of Ulthuan. The elves are the high elves are the only race on the planet that doesn't have to deal with Greenskins nonsense. And they are a plague on the planet, and they can adapt to survive in any environment. And the thing is, the more violent the environment is, the better they flourish. So, like, Norska and Troll Country, which are way up in the north and are super frigid and have lots of hostile monsters and people living there. Those are hot spots for Greenskins, and they thrive in that environment. So Troll Country, which if you have Norska, Troll Country is like right here. So Troll Country is basically between Kislev and it's that little wasteland, frozen wasteland space between Kislev and the Empire and Norska. And that is like one of the most most densely populated spots for Greenskins. And is actually where WAAAGH the Slaughterer comes from. He was born there. But, or sprouted there. But, of course, Norska and the New World do have their own fair share of Greenskins as well. And we've talked about the New World Greenskins in prior videos. Next up, we got the Book Thief. Outside of orcs, has any other group or species managed to harness or tame squigs? There's something adorable about squigs. No, not successfully. Not well. The Skaven have actually tried a number of times to tame squigs, but it has always ended in spectacular disaster. A good amount of that has to do with Skarsnik, because most Night Goblins won't even deal with Skaven. They will just attack them on sight. Like, they have a natural hatred between those two races, but Skarsnik has purposefully developed a relationship of trying to lure the Skaven into making deals with him, and then he backstabs them to a hilarious effect. And in one of those instances, one of his double crosses was that he made a deal with some master molders of Clan Molder to give them a bunch of squigs in exchange for, I don't remember what it was, but in exchange for like money or something. And so Skarsnik gave them a ton of squigs that were like knocked out. And what Skarsnik failed to mention to them is that the reason the squigs had been knocked out is that Skarsnik had basically hopped all of them up on like this super crazy, like almost adrenaline-like drug that made it that when they woke up, they just went into a frenzy and just like ripped apart, like exploded out of their cage and just ripped apart all of the Clan Molder laboratories and Fleshcrafter workshops and just like decimated a good portion of the Skaven base before it was taken care of. So no, the Skaven have been the only ones who have really tried, and it hasn't gone well for them. Most other races either are not in a... Because the thing is, if you don't dwell deep beneath the earth or have a lot of dealings deep beneath the earth, you're never even going to see a squig. The only time you would see a squig not in a deep underground cavern is because the Greenskins have tamed them and have brought them out to fight in war. This is the only time you're ever going to see squigs. Unless you're deep under the earth, which most races don't do. Next up, Pavel Pendlechuk asks, has there ever been a giant that has led a WAAAGH or smaller size Greenskin army? Kind of, yes. There is a giant known as Little Gork, and he is a very peculiar giant who, during a battle against, I think it was the dwarves, he got hit in the head by a grudge thrower, so like the stone thrower catapults of the dwarves. They chucked a rock and it hit him smack in the head, and something went a little wrong in his head, and he came to believe that he is the physical avatar of Gork. And whenever he is about to go into battle, he forces his, like, he took over his army, and he forced all of the Greenskins in his army to help paint him green before every fight. And then he goes wailing on the battlefield looking like some big doofus, like painted, you know, with greenskin paint. And he just like smashes around thinking he's the Greenskins' literal god. Though apparently he's had a fairly successful campaign in the Badlands and has not been defeated yet. So seems to be working out well for him. He is the only instance I've ever heard of that, though. And to my understanding, he doesn't leave the army very much through tactics. It's more of that I'm pretty sure a different Greenskin is actually the actual war boss, but they probably just follow Little Gork around and reap the benefits of him, like, sowing destruction. But he's surprisingly loyal to the horde he's attached to because of the whole whatever happened in his brain. But he's a very unique individual. Outside of that, no. Bruva Michael asks, if might makes right, why can't giants become a war boss? So this is actually a great segue. The problem with giants is that they're not very smart, and they really don't give two damns about conquest. The only thing a giant cares about is having enough to eat and where his next drink of alcohol is coming from. If it doesn't have to do with one of those two things, he does not care. So it's not that a dedicated giant could not become a war boss. It's more of just 99.9 to the infinite % of giants don't care. Plus, on top of that, most Greenskins don't even understand the language giants speak, which I think is called Grumbroth, Grumbroth, something like that. And that causes issues and makes leadership a little tricky. There are a number of like goblins that tend to learn how to speak it, but it's not super common for the giants to be able to have like a great dialogue with the Greenskins. Most of the time, for the goblins to try and communicate what they want the giant to do, it usually involves a lot of screeching and like gesticulating and hand waves and like over exaggerate, like 30 goblins trying to point at what they want the giant to go smash. It's a very comical situation until you realize that the giant might very well catch on and he comes lumbering towards you. All right, then we have a question here from Feather Freaks, who says, 19 years of loving Warhammer, and this is by far the best lore channel I found. Thanks, man. Appreciate it. Have there ever been any famous giants? Also, can you go over some info on the Siege Giants and the Albion Giants? Thank you. So, there have been a couple of famous giants here and there. I'd say they're more peculiar than famous. But most of them, unfortunately, tend to only become famous after they get killed. But of the still living ones, probably the most notable from a Greenskin perspective is Little Gork, who we already talked about earlier. But as for the others, Chaos Siege Giants, which you asked about, are created by the Chaos Dwarves. And I think you can find more info on them in the Chaos Dwarf Q&A, which you can find easily on the Q&A playlist I have here. But just in case I didn't go over them, Chaos Siege Giants are giants that have been essentially enslaved by the Chaos Dwarves, and what they do is they try and make up for the giants' failings by just covering them head to toe in this super heavy armor. So these giants are basically walking fortresses. And unfortunately for the giant, they they also tend to like put a lot of runes onto the like blood runes and just really ugly types of rune magic into the armor to make the giants go into like a berserk fury or allow the Chaos Orcs to control them more fully. And the reason they actually cover them in armor is not only to make the giant less susceptible to shooting, but also because their armor has a bunch of built-in hooks and spikes, so that when the giant inevitably trips or dies and falls over, or at least makes it to like the enemy walls and like sags against them while it's trying to tear them apart, the Chaos Dwarves can use its body as a ladder. Because the Chaos Dwarves 99% of the time are expecting it to die. Their hope is for it to like get to the enemy walls, start doing some damage, maybe pull a few towers down, and then inevitably get killed, and then its body will sag against the fortress, which basically acts as its own siege tower. So, however, to make it a little better at destroying defenses, they have this really nasty habit, the Chaos Dwarves, of chopping off the giant's hands at the wrist. And then what they'll do is they'll basically surgically implant these like big screws through the bone, the wrist bone, and attach these myriad of giant hooked blades that they use so that they can like swing around and scoop people off or cut enemy monsters in half or just stab them, but they're really designed to hook around like towers and forts and pull with the giant's weight so it like rips the foundations out. But that's pretty much what Chaos Siege Giants are. As for the Albion Giants are kind of a bizarre set of individuals. There is some evidence that suggests that the old ones intentionally put the Sky Titans, or at least some Sky Titans, onto the island of Albion to make it so that they acted as the island's guardians along with the human natives. And it's not clear exactly how they became giants over time, if that's true. That would explain why they tend to be much larger and why they tend to be much smarter than regular giants. Either they used to be Sky Titans over there and then just over time, or maybe due to some catastrophe, because most Sky Titans were wiped out by the Ogre Kingdoms. But it's very unlikely that those Sky Titans' descendants ended up on Albion. What's more likely is that there was a small community of Sky Titans on Albion that maybe when Chaos came into the world, or maybe during some crisis, because Albion is a place that Chaos has always been trying to get its hooks into, and maybe somehow during one of those incidents the Sky Titans got killed, or maybe just over time, you know, they kind of descended into what we know as giants. But the Albion giants are of a much higher quality than giants in the traditional Warhammer world. So because of that, they tend to be notably larger. Not colossal, they're not like bone grinder giants, which are huge, but they are larger than most giants, and they tend to be much more intelligent. And there are some bizarrely unique ones on Albion. Like there are a number of Albions on giants, or there are a number of giants on Albion, there we go, who have 2 heads, notably. That's like a surprisingly common feature among Albion giants. But the biggest thing about them is that they are much less destructive than their cousins in the old world. And they work very willingly with the humans of Albion, like the shamans and all the tribes and stuff. And they actually have like a mutually beneficial relationship and act willingly as the defenders of that land. At least most of the time. There have been some bad apples when Chaos came over there. But the famous ones are Cactor and Bollugs, who are known as the Giants of Albion. And they, according to the Dogs of War mythos, roam around the old world along with the druid Hengus, who understands their language and is kind of like the translator between them and the people of the old world. Granted, when Warhammer Fantasy kind of entered its current form, where it went super grimdark, even more grimdark than it had been before, and it ditched a lot of like the really silly comedy aspects of the lore to try and tell like a much more cohesive world story, the Dogs of War as a whole kind of got thrown in the trash bin. But all of their stories are still around on the internet, and they're really funny. So the Giants of Albion, the famous ones, have a really bizarre storyline. It's ridiculous and it's genuinely really funny. And if you want to read it, you can just Google it, the Giants of Albion, and it actually details and it details the story of a Talayan. I don't remember if he was an emperor, but a Talayan high general by the name of Curious Geezer, who, if you can't tell, is the Warhammer version of Julius Caesar, who dealt with the Giants of Albion. And he, let's just say it was his last victory, was his whole situation with Cactor and Bollugs. So if you wanna look into that story, feel free to Google it up. Our next question comes in from Emil Clausen, who asks, has there ever been an Orc and Goblin Duo? I know that Orcs look down on Gobbos, but has there ever been a Gobbo that has been the right-hand man for an Orc war boss? P.S. First time asking you a question. Love the Skaven. Hope to see them again. Love your stuff. Hope to become a fellow Loremaster someday. Thanks, Emil. So, there are a ton of Orcs who have Goblin advisors, and there are a ton of Goblins who war bosses who have like their supreme bodyguard, and I wouldn't call it a friend, but like the guy they turn to is an Orc. That being said, the most famous duo of an Orc Gobbo like super team is actually a duo called Grumlock and Gazbad. Or Gazbag. So Grumlock is the Orc and Gazbag is the Goblin. And they were actually uniquely crafted by Games Workshop for the Warhammer Online Age of Reckoning video game, which was a MMO, which unfortunately died many years ago, but there is a private server you can still play it on. That being said, their dynamic isn't super duper unique, but the thing that made Grumlock and Gazbag really interesting was that they were like attached at the hip. Like Grumlock was this huge hulking orc, and Gazbag was literally like this little goblin, super powerful shaman that chilled out on his shoulder. And when you fought them in the end game, if you made it to them in the end game, you had to fight the two of them together at once, and they were very, very powerful. But in the lore, they were super strong. Probably the strongest pair of Greenskins that have ever existed. Like, if you counted them as one entity, they'd probably be the most powerful Greenskin ever created by Games Workshop. And it's because they had a ton of magic items that augmented their power significantly that Malekith gave them. Because it was the whole explanation for how they got the Greenskins to work with the Dark Elves and the Warriors of Chaos, was that Malekith managed to manipulate the Greenskins by perfecting. He essentially used a goblin and orc in his slave pits and made them into perfect slaves. At least he tried to, and the result was Grumlock and Gazbag, who were at least willing to work with him and the Warriors of Chaos in exchange for smashing up all the dwarves, humies, and high elves. So they managed to, that's how they storied that. But yeah, so you can look up those two. They even had a model that was released for a very limited time, and I'm super duper sad I was too young to get it, because it was actually a really awesome looking model. Alright, and today's, you know what, we got two more questions, we're just going to knock them out. Next question comes in from Hugh Gidney, who asks, how many Greenskins are in the Warhammer Fantasy world? Billions, at least billions, but it's impossible to guess, because they are so violent, especially just among each other, that their population is just constantly going up and down and up and down at super dramatic rates. The only useful number I can give you is that the only race that is more populous in the entire planet than the Greenskins are the Skaven. I would say Skaven are first, Greenskins are second. So, last question for today then comes from Jarek von Lassenberg, who asks, are there any Warhammer Fantasy novels that are narratives from the perspective of a Greenskin main character? To my understanding, to my memory, there are only two. There are a number of novels that have like certain chapters from the perspective of a Greenskin, but the two big ones that focus almost solely from the perspective of a Greenskin are Skarsnik, which of course is 90% from Skarsnik's perspective, and a short story called The King of Blackcrag, which is a short story that's 100% from the perspective of Gorfang Rotgut, who is the squatter king of Blackcrag. But you can actually get both of those stories if you pick up the fairly recently released Carrick 8 Peaks Omnibus from Black Library or Games Workshop. So that'll be it for today's questions. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.